And joining us virtually, we're going to have our colleague from Ethiopia, and that is Dr. Tadesse Daba, who is Director, Agricultural Biotechnology Research Directorate, Ethiopian Institute of Agricultural Research. So we're going to be looking at all spheres and all aspects of issues of food security so that at least we ensure that every mouth gets something to eat. Just from that particular topic, I don't know if already, by a show of hands, who might have a question? Even before we start, who might have a question right now, just from the topic, food security? Because I want us to give Zainab Bondati a difficult time on this panel today. This is a very key topic, and I know she's going to be struggling with this. You already have a question. You see the questions already coming. So to our panelists, be ready. This is going to be more of quick fire. We are not going to have monologues. We are going to have dialogues with everybody. So I'd like to welcome on stage our moderator for this session, and that is Zainab Bondati, talking about science and technology, the editor at NTV Kenya. Karibu sana. Let's give a round of applause as she comes, and then we can get this debate and discussion underway. As you can see, we're not giving Zainab a seat today because that's how hot we want this topic to be. Karibu.
Thank you. We're ready? Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to day 2. I hope you've had something to eat. And if you have, I'd like you to thank a farmer, because farmers are the reason we are able to eat something. And thanking farmers is part of the reason we're going to have this discussion this morning, talking about food security and the relationship between food and climate change, and what roles we have as the citizens of Africa, the residents of Africa, in transforming our food systems so that we are able to survive the crisis that is climate change. And my colleague Larry already introduced my panelists, but I could just go over it again. My name is Zainab Bondati, science editor at NTV Kenya. Right next to me is Martha Bianyamath, Chief of Party, Land O'Lakes International Development. Next to Martha is Julius Kamau, Chief Conservator, Kenya Forest Service, and this forest where we are in is part of his jurisdiction, so he's our host. Thank you for hosting us at Karura. And last but not least, Ambassador Carla Mukavi, who's the country representative, FAO Kenya. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all ready for this exciting conversation. So just to set the scene about what we're going to talk about today, Africa has a very large population. But as it is, by 2050, the continent will only be able to meet 13% of its food needs. 13%. Imagine that, 13%. Where are we going to get the rest of it? Where are we going to get the rest of it so that we can feed our ever-growing population? Right now, 16% of GDP is lost because of malnutrition alone. And yields are projected to drop by between 15 and 20% because of temperature rises. And if the temperature continues rising, the yields will keep dropping more and more. And already we have farmers across the continent complaining about low yields. Kenya is right now, the larger Horn of Africa is stuck in the middle of a drought, the worst drought in 40 years. And all this is happening, yet the continent has 60% of the world's arable land. So what is the problem? If we have 60% of the world's arable land, why then are we not able to feed ourselves? So that's where we're going to start this discussion. Martha, what is the problem?
Thank you, Zainab.
Pick a microphone.
Thank you, Zainab. Good morning, everybody. First, let me thank the nation who organized this, and it's really a privilege to be here to share my perspectives. Now, Zainab, thank you for the question, but I don't have the answer. I just have perspectives. Because African agriculture, as you know it, the way it's characterized, small-scale farmers with the lowest adoption of technology, lowest adoption of fertilizer, improved seed, our productivity has been really low. Thus, we've not been able to feed ourselves. We still have a huge food import bill, $35 million US, that's likely to reach over $100 billion US by 2025. But the signs are that African agriculture has huge potential, but we don't eat potential. We have to unlock that potential. And in the face of climate change now, we are seeing agriculture even facing more severe challenges, severe droughts, floods, and more hungry mouths each year. So what do we do about it? There are many solutions.
Martha, I'd just like you to skip the solutions right now. We will get back to there as we're still trying to figure out what is the problem. I'd like to jump over to Carla.
So
Carla,
those are the problems, the challenges we are facing
Yes.
that are causing low productivity and food insecurity.
Yes, thank you. Carla, what is the problem? From where you sit as FAO, is it that we lack vision? Do we lack ambition? Do we lack leadership? What is it we are lacking? What is the missing link here?
Thank you,
Please
Zainab.
raise the mic closer.
Thank you very much, Zainab. I really want to thank really for inviting us and for this great opportunity as FAO, of course, as UN, to be part of this conversation that is really promoted by the nation. The problem is there, and actually it's not lack of vision, it's not lack of ambition, it's not lack of leadership. Actually, it is there. If we talk about Africa, it takes us to the Agenda 2063 that actually is envisioning that we really enjoy prosperity and sustainable development, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, where actually goal number 2, the ambition is to end hunger and ensure food security and nutrition. And then we come to Kenya, we have the Vision 2030 also, we have the bottom-up approach now that is really aiming at leaving no one behind. So we have, but the challenges are really huge. And actually, the conversation today is on climate change. So climate change is really the big challenges that are impacting in agriculture. And you heard from our fellow panelists here indicating that we really have to invest. We have to invest in agriculture. We have to make sure that, of course, we look at how do we do in order to be able to, of course, produce more, in order to be able to link the farmers to the markets so that they can be able, of course, to earn more and, have that incentive that will make them to produce more. How do we really build that resilience? Because now, actually, with the climate change, we have to look at adaptation. How do we adapt to climate change?
Yes.
How do we mitigate climate change so that, of course, it can harm us less? And this can only be done by building resilience, by looking at, of course, climate-smart agriculture, where, of course, you have got, producing more in less. You have to look at improved seeds. But to say that really one of the big challenges that we face is climate change. If we look at Africa, it's not only actually climate change, but it is one of the big defiance of our times. We also have situation of conflict. We have a situation of course, economic downturns. Actually, one of the reports that the FAO is producing every year is the state of food security and nutrition. And every year we see the increase of food insecurity, people going hungry. Right now in Kenya, we are looking at 4.3, almost 4.5 million of Kenyans that are really food insecure because of climate change. So which means that the problem is there. We have to invest. We have really to come together. We are just coming from COP27, where again we have doubled our ambitions. We are talking about the fund that is going really to compensate because of the losses, because of the damage that the climate change is really imposing into agriculture, into, of course, food security. But we really want to see this happening, that climate ambition, so that, of course, when we invest, we can see the difference.
Yes, thank you, Carla. Now, Julius, I'd like you to jump in at that point. She talked about climate change and climate change being the big defining factor in Africa's inability to feed itself. And you are one of the people who are working towards mitigating climate change. What is the link between what you do and food security?
Thank you, Zainab, and thank you for that question. First of all, being the host of this event in Karura Forest, I want to thank the National Media Group for this cooperation and engagement, and I think there couldn't have been another better venue than this and the topic that we have. But I am not a food expert, so therefore, if there's someone who would sweat on this panel, maybe it's me, but I'll defend myself and say, perhaps the problem, before I go to what you have asked, the problem is not being able to analyze the problem. That's the problem. And two, looking at things in silos and not looking at the continuum. We sit, and I want just to bring the backstage, because sometimes forestry and trees and conservation is looked at the backstage. In fact, some people here may be asking, what is a conservator, forest conservator doing in a panel discussing food issue? But I want just to say this. If you look at Africa itself, as we speak today, we have about 636 million hectares of forests, okay? These forests play a very critical role in terms of providing water. So if you're talking about agriculture, whether it is rain-fed or it is supported through irrigation, then if you don't talk about conserving our forests and ecosystems, then it's not sustainable. The discussion you have is not sustainable. Even on the farmland, Africa has about 441 million hectares of wooded land under agroforestry ecosystem. That tells you where the forest resources and tree resources sits in providing the basic parameters to ensure sustainable production of food in our ecosystems. That has to be understood. And I want to say that sometimes this has not come out to the open. People look at agriculture as soil, fertilizer, and water. But they never ask themselves, where is this water coming from? Whether it is rain-fed, forests ecosystem has a role to play in creating that microclimate and even helping us to have that convectional rain. Whether it is irrigated, that water is coming from somewhere in the upper catchment. Soil, when you look at the tree component in the farmland and agroforestry system, it is a key parameter for ensuring that that soil is regenerated and that that soil is conserved and protected for subsistence and large-scale farming. And therefore, we must break down the problem into pieces. We must understand the continuum, and we must be able now to project ourselves and say, without taking care of the base, we cannot then offer solution at the top. And therefore, I'm here to present a case that we must protect. The challenge, when I sign up, I want to finish the case. The challenge is that of those 636 million hectares by 2020 in Africa, we lose about 3.9 million hectares in a year. Deforestation in a year. That is where the problem is. Because we are expanding land for agriculture, because we are abandoning another land that I took yesterday, because the land I'm going to is fertile. Within 1 year, it will become infertile. I go for more. It's a tragedy of the common. We must intensify agriculture. We must protect the ecosystem that we have so that they can give us the water we need and microclimate that we require to sustainably manage our agricultural systems.
You know, Julius, when you mentioned that link between forest and food security, last week NTV did a story about the state of the Mount Elgon ecosystem and how the deforestation and the human activities in that forest is now starting to affect the farmers. And even children now have to be incorporated in looking for water, and they have to go deeper into the forest looking for water, which is not safe for children. So I can see what you mean there. Now, I'd like to bring in Dr. Tadesse Daba, who is joining us virtually from Ethiopia. Dr. Tadesse, picking up from what Julia said about the link between forests and food security, why aren't farmers being incorporated in this practice of saving forests as they open up land for agriculture?
Yes, good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Zainab. Yes, as you said, Africa has more than 60% of the world arable land, which means it's almost close to 40% of the continent is arable land. So despite this, as you said, the elements that you have raised, like ambition, the leadership, there is a combination of problems pertaining there. So if you see the annual report of food crisis report, the three major things in food insecurity are climate, instabilities in the economic shocks. So among this economic climate change in many ways global issue.
Dr. Daba, there seems to be
as you
interference on your
said,
sound. There seems
raised-
to be a bit of interference on your sound, so I'd like to skip you for a moment as the technical team sorts that out, and I will circle back to you. So coming back to Martha, we've set the scene. We've talked about what the problem is. Now let's talk about how then do we fix this problem. We've done a lot of patchwork over the years. We've done, somebody's doing a project here, someone is doing a project there, someone is doing another project there, FAO is driving a project there, KFS is driving a project there. And these all little projects enough to transform our food systems to where we want to go?
I think the first thing we need to do is to change our mindsets. Start looking at agriculture as a food system, as a whole. Listening to him, you can see him making a very direct link between afforestation, availability of water, and therefore food, being able to produce enough food. Now, over the years, the inability to look at the food system as a whole and look at the natural resource base on which our agriculture sits and how our unsustainable farming practices are destroying that natural base and therefore preventing us from optimizing the production, agricultural production to meet our food security needs. The inability to see that and to plan and invest adequately in unlocking that potential means that over the years we are unable to produce the food we need to feed ourselves. So the first thing we need to do is to change our thinking, our mindsets, and for governments to identify champions that can lead this transformation that is cross-sectoral, multi-sectoral, that involves not just, for instance, the Ministry of Agriculture, but when they are planning, be able to think about the food system, what goes into that system, what will support it to transform and move away from unsustainable practices to more sustainable practices that can adapt to climate change, reverse the effects of climate change, reduce the effects of climate change, and make our agriculture more productive. Climate change adaptation plans, very critical. And we see that many countries have now climate change adaptation plans. But again, what is missing is the link between what we have planned and the actual actors, the value chain actors, the farmers, the handlers, the aggregators, the off-takers. Their practices in themselves can reverse the adaptation plans we've put in place if they don't change their practices and move also into a food systems lens that is holistic, that is looking at what is it that I must do to adapt and to reduce my carbon footprint. It's the mindset and it's the planning and the investments that need to be aligned.
Okay. Now, Carla, picking up from that point, changing our mindset. That's something we talk a lot about, that we need to change our mindset. But how do we do that?
And,
Lift your microphone.
Actually, agreeing again with Martha when she mentioned that we really have to change our mindset, and this is the questions that you are bringing, Zainab. And we have been really doing a lot with regard to that. But of course, more should be done. And we have to bring everyone to the table, you know, all involved. Actually, I want to recall that it was last year where we had the Food System Summit, you know, to look at how do we really transform our agri-food systems so that they are resilient and they really adapt to climate change. They are really sustainable. They are inclusive, so no one is left behind. We are talking about really bringing everyone to the table that can really contribute to the conversation. And because what we see, there is no really other option. Actually, there is no planet B. We are all living in this planet, and we have to protect it, and we see it. So therefore, of course, we have to continue raising awareness. This is very important. Really mobilizing campaigns, identifying the champions that they can really drive this process, and the leadership is really key on that. And actually, and again, we really have to invest. Of course, we are talking about the Maputo Declaration, that was reiterated also in Malabo, where
But
of
we've
course
never met the aspirations of those declarations.
It's true. Of course, the
Because
10%.
the declaration, the Maputo, for example, says we have to set aside 10% of our budget to agriculture. But if you look at the average, Kenya does an average of 4.6, I think. There was only one time in 2007 when we did 11%. But beyond that, we keep falling behind. But now that you've mentioned those declarations, what's the point of having these declarations if we are not going to live up to the aspirations?
We have to work on them. We have to implement them. Those are commitments that we took. We took the commitment of really, of course, spending the 10% of the GDP into agriculture because we realize that this is really needed. If we are not investing, if we are not harvesting water, if we are not, of course, bringing technologies and making them adaptable to the communities so that they can really produce more in a sustainable way, and all those issues that we are talking about, it means that we will not reach that ambition that we have set. So this is really needed. And it's the only way we can really be able, of course, to increase production, to reduce dependence, and really to feed, the African, of course, society.
Yes. Julius, I like that you started by saying you're not a food expert. And because you're not a food expert, I'd therefore like to ask you, as a non-food expert, what do you think is your role in transforming Africa's food systems?
Thank you so much, and my role starts here. So the conversation I'm trying to bring up here is to ensure that in every time there is a discussion about food security, forest and tree resources has to be in the discussion. Any other thing, we are sitting on a collapsing pillar. I want to say this also, that new is not always good. New is not always good. From where I come from, sometimes you are told if you go away and you find there is no way and things are not good, go back to where you started. When some of us are growing up and now you can predict our age, we had basic principles about soil and water conservation. And it was not by choice. We were made to do it whether we liked it or not. The Fanyaju, the terraces, the Napier grass, the cutoff, that kept our capital, which is soil. And if it goes, then we lose it. If today you look at the catchment, the farmlands, where the water coming from the forest is clean, but the moment it hits the farmland, it gets dirty. Every time you walk around, and some of us were able to actually fly over this country, and you see a brown river, sometimes we take it as it's normal. It is not. This is our capital, which is so valuable that we are taking to the ocean that does not need it.
Erosion.
And therefore, the soil erosion issue has to be dealt with. But when you talk about agricultural production, the first thing that people think and pick is a fertilizer, okay? That it's going to solve every problem. But we also have a problem of acidity in our land. So that actually what you need is not the fertilizer, but actually lime to deal with it. I am not a food expert, but I can tell you, don't challenge me, Zainab. I can tell you, because I know exactly what it means, because we are interacting with more than 3 million Kenyans in a neighborhood of a forest, and we know what they are going through. So can we see how best to protect and jealously guard our soil? It is the past capital.
Do you have a farm yourself?
Yes, I do.
On your own farm, how are you protecting your soil?
Now that I don't want to be exposed for other reasons, but I have to say I'm a very genuine public servant, and I can tell you I have a 3-acre land. 3-acre land that I was able to procure at some time, but as we speak today, I put it under avocado hash, 350 of them. And the reason I have done that is because I'm a forester, I need a tree. But I also need a tree that can speak to the food security. Therefore, I will be maintaining that avocado, but I also will be feeding the nation. So I don't want to be fed. I also want to feed myself and also be a party to feed other people. That's what I have been able to do. And I want to tell you this. We also must stop being selfish. Because as Africa, 90% of our forests are naturally regenerating. The one we have been able to plant is only 10%. So it means we are enjoying what our forefathers did, but we are not reinvesting. And yet we expect the nature to support us. It's not going to happen. We must also deliberately say, if I'm benefiting from resources that were invested by the previous generation, I must also sacrifice my time, not only for another person, but for my generation coming from me. We must also become selfless, and we must become people of servitude, and we must also look at sustainable development and intergenerational equity from a very serious perspective.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Daba, are you there? Dr. Tadesse, You're there, good.
Yes,
Yes, now we can hear you better. So picking up from where Julius has left off about the role of forest and food security, how then do it, Africa's agriculture is largely smallholder, and Julius here as a forester, he wants us to plant more trees so that nature can protect us. But this smallholder farmer is working on an average of an acre. On an acre, how is he going to plant trees?
Yes, actually we don't mean that every agriculture is against forestation. For example, if we take like perennial crops, as he said, for example, avocado and the perennial fruits, they are part of forest, and we should think of like every agriculture is not always against forestation. So smallholder farmers, yes, more than 80% of almost all African nations are smallholder farmers, but we should intensify the production, the productivity of these smallholder farmers through supporting them through technologies. I want to say something like, is there any African country which has its own agricultural inputs industries? Like all these smallholder farmers are always importing these expensive agricultural inputs like fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, but there is no African leader who is really producing all agricultural inputs in the country. And how many of us as a nation or as a continent are supporting our agricultural research from our tribes? It's very many African countries, nations are, for agricultural research, researchers are sitting from abroad. And agricultural research are not fully funded by the policymakers of each nation. So what I mean is the best way to protect the forest in smallholder scale is to produce or to improve the productivity, supporting these smallholder farmers through technologies.
Okay, great. So we've talked about fertilizer, Martha. And right now the conversation is slowly shifting towards organic fertilizer. I'd just like you to define what organic fertilizer is, because people seem to think that if you've got cow dung, you can put it on your farm as it is. But what really is organic fertilizer?
Thank you. No, organic fertilizer is that natural fertilizer, like waste, like animal manure. But I think the conversation should be different. Inorganic fertilizer is not bad. We cannot grow agriculture without synthetic fertilizer. We can't. But the issue is, how do you apply it and manage it efficiently so that in a way that you reduce your carbon footprint? And sustainable practices is what we must fight. And when I look at the national climate change adaptation plans, I see that there is good thinking. You see that it's intelligent thinking and the plans are there. But they are so delinked from what the ordinary person is doing. Every farmer, I am a cattle farmer, and I come from a family that has a lot of land. We have like over 3,000 acres, ranching, cattle, and everything. But why can't we all wear a food systems lens and just look at our farming holistically? Look at this land and say, what potential can this land, what potential exists here to be able to put more carbon in the soil and reduce the carbon we are putting in the atmosphere? That's the thinking. From a large farmer to a small, no one can do it alone. Whether a commercial farmer, small farmer, you can't do it alone. We need a community of practice with the food systems lens, thinking holistically.
But you mentioned you're a livestock farmer, and livestock farmers are also being blamed as part of the reason for climate change through the emission of methane. The livestock emit methane. That's about 18% of the global carbon emissions. How are you managing that on your own farm yourself?
I think that is also a bit skewed, because at the same time, cattle sequester a lot of carbon in the soil through their manure, through their urine. It's how you manage your livestock. And again, data, science, evidence is very critical. I have met organizations. Why is it that every farmer, wherever you are, you can't quantify how much carbon you are putting back in the soil with your practices? These tools are available, but we don't do it. So I would want to see that beyond just having national adaptation plans, this information and capacity and knowledge gap is bridged and it percolates down to the farmers. We are able to know that with so much land, I can put back so much carbon, I can contribute to mitigation, to reducing the carbon in the atmosphere. And it's not about cattle, it's about how you manage the livestock, it's about how much you put back carbon and reduce the carbon in the atmosphere. That's the data we need, and then monitor it over time. But the conversation is still very much here in the boardrooms, in these seminars, workshops. We need to come down and practice it.
Okay. Julius, I'd like to ask you the same question. Excuse me. I'd like to ask you the same question I've asked Tadesse. These smallholder farmers who have very little land, where do you expect them to plant trees?
Thank you so much. I was also brought up from a family which has a relatively small land, so I know what needs to be done. I think the issue is that planning does not have to happen always at the national level. Even 1 acre of land can be planned. But we must also be able to build the capacity of the farmers. We know some time back we had a very strong extension services that was being provided, and we could see when we were growing up an extension officer visiting our farms and guiding us on what to do. That this place you put coffee, here you can put your arrowroots, here you put your 1 or 2 cows for you to get organic manure, here you get some yams, you'll have here some, a few trees, agroforestry, especially because of coffee, for example. Even if you had 1 acre, you need to plant, for example, Grevillea, which is required for shade. So it's possible that even in a small piece of land, you can be able to diversify your options. And what you do in that case is that you actually build resilience on the subsistence farming. I remember that time, even when there was drought, we could go and get the yams, and you could get the arrowroots. When things are good, you could access maize and beans. So at a subsistence level, I believe that before we talk about commercial agricultural production, let us talk about a household being able to feed itself from all year round. And that will, yes?
So if I have 1 acre of land, how much of it should be under trees?
Of course, with the previous conversation is that 10% of it would have been in other trees. But of course, with the now new commitment of 30% tree cover by 2032, at least that percent of it should be trees. But I want to demystify. Those trees do not necessarily have to be trees that for timber, for firewood. You can combine that. But remember, avocado is a tree, okay? Mango is a tree. Macadamia is a tree. In any case, coconut is a tree. In any case, when the droughts hit so much, like what we are coming from, the maize and beans will be gone. You can't have. The only thing that will be standing is a tree, possibly a mango and avocado. And that is why I want us to look at a solution from an open point of view. So the tree must come first, not behind. Because when things are bad, that's when people are looking out for it. Whether it is for timber, for charcoal, for fruit, that's where it comes last. Because it is more resilience to climate change than other subsistence farm crops.
The reason I asked you about trees is because a lot of times farmers raise concern that there are some trees you'll plant and then nothing grows underneath. And so they feel like they have less land to work with because they can't go near and under that tree. And so working around the tree then becomes difficult for them, and they see, I might as well just cut that tree. Yes. So what kind of tree would they, besides the fruit trees, are there other specific trees that they can grow that would take up as little space as possible so that they can still also use the land for other crops?
Yes, there are some trees, we call them agroforestry multipurpose trees. And actually, they do many things. One, they conserve the soil. They add nutrient in the soil so that your crop can be able to grow. And you are able to actually to cap them, to coppice them, and you can feed your animals, and they can come back as an organic manure. So basically, it's a question of, as I said, building the capacity of the farmers to understand. But we want to say that in this country, there are so many agroforestry species, depending on which part of the country you are. And I want to thank ICRAF for the many years they have been here. They have been able to create capacity on the landscapes. And I can tell you from where I come from, farmers don't have to tell them to grow trees. They know because they know the importance of those trees. If it's about agroforestry, you just plant a tree. It will work together with the crops that you have. You will be able to feed your cattle. It will ensure that you have better soil regeneration for your crop. So in subsistence level, you're not going to be able to go hungry. Because one time you have milk that you are selling, maybe 1 liter or 2. Another day you have your yam. Another day you have your avocado. Another time you have your animals. So basically, we must go back to the basics. And I want to end this way, as I answer your question. How many of us today, in our small farms, are able to see bees as you used to see them a long time ago? When I was growing up, every week, every day, you'll see a bee swarm crossing over your house. Today, they are not there because our land are now monopolistic. We don't have enough biodiversity in our landscape to even have pollinators. And I spoke about other systems. I can tell you this. In the future, for our children coming in the future, they may be dealing with aided pollination rather than nature pollination. And that will be a bigger challenge to deal with. And therefore, we must diversify. We must look at indicators. When you see your farm has no butterfly and it has no bee, there's a problem. And you don't have, those are indicators about life and health. And we must ask ourselves, where did we go wrong? Thank you.
Tadessa, picking up from there, pollinators and their role in food security. A concern has been raised around the world about bee populations declining because of the agricultural practices, the pesticides that farmers are using, and now in Africa, farmers are starting to use nets to keep out insects. How do we still use the pesticides and maybe even the nets while being friendly to the bees? Dr. Tadesse, you hear me? I think you're muted.
Okay.
Yes, now we hear you.
Can you hear,
Yes,
can you hear me now?
Now we hear you, yes.
Yes, everything goes with forestation, and as you know, bees cannot survive without forest. And definitely there are some crops which are highly pollinated by bees, and if we need those kind of high-level pollination in the science, we need to go for forestation. And sometimes which may be difficult is, you know, these small-scale farmers do many things in their farms, and we do need multiple pesticides, as mentioned, which can be a fodder for their livestock, which can also fix nitrogen so that it doesn't deplete the soil underneath, and there can be a shade. For example, there are trees in our case which are very good shades and nitrogen fixers for crops like coffee, and for some cash crops. And then, as you said, pesticides, there is something that we need to do as an Africans, and we should be able to adopt technologies which are very alternative and sustainable, like biotech crops, for example, that completely, replace the use of pesticides, and insect-resistant crops in biotech, drought-tolerant crops can be used based on their specific purposes. And we need to build our confidence, our capacity to produce those kind of technologies through funding our agricultural research institutes, organizations, and so that we can improve or reduce the use of these chemical pesticides, herbicides, through using modern technologies.
Thank you, Dr. Tadesse. I'd just like to remind the audience that we can take your questions. So if you've got a question, just put your hand up and the microphone will come to you. And then I will come to you for the question and answer. Just raise your hand clearly so that whoever has the microphone can see you, and then a microphone will come to you. So Martha, speaking about technology, Dr. Tadesse has mentioned technology. Indigenous knowledge versus technology. What's the link?
Close link, I must say. Technology has to be informed by local knowledge. Because you can't just bring a technology and introduce it to farmers and you think there's going to be adoption. It's going to be a technology that responds to their actual need, a technology that's inclusive, a technology that is transformative, that has benefits to multiple stakeholders in that food system. Just to give an example, in every country you hear them talking, resisting, we don't want GMOs, we don't want, but it's a technology, but it's not that they don't want, but it's just that the conversation is, we are importing food that's GMO. The conversation is, how can this technology help you, and how you as a community can use it to bring benefits to the system. So if the technology is not informed by local knowledge, then it's not adopted, then it is resisted, and it cannot transform a food system. Yeah. There's a close link, and they must speak to each other.
Kadla, you work a lot with farmers across Kenya. How have you seen this indigenous knowledge be put in practice and transform the lives of communities?
Thank you, Zainab. And actually, before I move to the question that you are raising, I really wanted also to agree here with Dr. Kamau, and one of really the great examples that we have in terms of really restoration of ecosystems is the Kirisia forest, which actually this year they even won of
The one in Samburu
in
County.
in Samburu County. They won really the 2022 FAO award because of the conservation agriculture. And there actually we come back to the issue of the change of the mindset and champions that they can really drive this process. Because of course the communities were saying they use really to benefit for the forest. But of course, over the years, and because of the impact of climate change, they would see the forest degrading. So they realized that, they have to move out of the forest. So voluntarily, they decided to move out of the forest. And of course, after some time, after some years, they are really now harnessing really the benefits of the really restoration of the ecosystems, regeneration of the vegetations. Actually, I wanted to bring the issue of the beekeeping, which really shows that really, of course, that ecosystem is so healthy. So to say that, it's possible. Conservation agriculture can really take us far, and also afforestation. And it's true, of course, indigenous knowledge is so essential, and it has to be that indigenous knowledge that has to really to inform our technologies. I couldn't really agree more. And one issue that also came from this conversation is that, we do have best practices, and we have to inform them with also extensions, because the farmers, if they see the benefits of on the technologies, on of course the best practices, they will adopt easily. And this is what as FAO we have been really doing, working very closely with them and really showing them that of course, you have climate change. The way you used to do, maybe you have to adapt, you have to do it in a way that of course you adapt what is good to improve, of course, your yields, and of course improve your livelihoods and their lives. So I really wanted to say that, we have to harness the potential of this indigenous knowledge to make sure that, of course, it's really complemented with, of course, the non-traditional ones. So they go hand in hand, they complement each other, they are not mutually exclusive.
Yes. Julius, there's a question here for you by Samuel Mudhike. Samuel would like to know, why can't we come up with very punitive laws on logging?
Thank you so much. That's a policy matter. But basically, it's something that we have actually thought about, and it's something that is ongoing. And basically, there's a review process about the Forest Conservation Management Act 2016, and we'll be able to inform the process because the penalties have to be higher than they are, the fines have to be higher than they are. As far as and as much as we want to make the laws stronger than they are today, having served at the seat I serve as a CCF for the Kenya Forest Service, having interacted with the forest adjacent communities who are very vulnerable, okay, and who basically do not have access to many, to many things, I have to come to appreciate that we must use different approaches. Yes, for the criminals who want to come and take forest lands, basically they have to be faced with a serious, within the law. For those who have the ability and they're using poor people to commit crime, we must be able to get them, and have the law has to support us in doing so. But what we also decided as Kenya Forest Service and with the Ministry of Environment is that we also must mind the livelihood of the people neighboring the forest. I'll give a case scenario for Kakamega Forest, which is in the world, it is the forest which is surrounded by the highest local population. And therefore the pressure is real and it's driven by genuine needs. And therefore, we can go there with forest rangers and enforce and do all that we can, but that does not offer the solution. The sustainable solution is minding their livelihood, having them invest in nature-based enterprises, having the land they have productive, having them grow trees on farm, having them some energy-saving GECOs, having them have some cows and one or two to improve their economic livelihood. That way, we'll draw the pressure from the forest ecosystem. I think the solution and the way to sustain our forest resources is by enabling the community around there to be capable, to be able, and therefore they are not even interested to come in as we give them the normal access right. That is more sustainable as we continue to deal with the issues of the regulatory approach.
Thank you. Who has a microphone? Great. Please stand up, say your name and who you're addressing your question to.
My name is Bidan Bugwa, and I work for Green Blue Foundation as the founder and the president. I would like to ask this question to FAO. There has been institutions like FAO and agriculture, ministries and so forth, many institutions, and they meet to solve the problem of food security for many decades. Is it that we do the same thing and they repeat it many times because food security continue to deteriorate? What can we do that is outside the box so that we don't have to talk about the same story like in another next meeting? So
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Who else has a microphone? Oh, you had another question?
Yes, I
Okay.
have another one. Can I just give, I do conservation farming, and for 1/8 of an acre, if you plant trees around the 1/8 boundaries, that is 10%. If again you go 16, 32, up to 1 acre, by just planting around, you get that. The other point before I ask the question is...
I need you to get your question very quickly.
Yes, let me just put it. To hydrate the land, like I have done, I have hydrated my land by first planting a forest around the farm, and the second, by making sure there is no water during the rain comes out of my farm to any other place. And so, if we want to deal with the challenge of drought, in your view, what should we do more so that our land has a bit of water that you can use for farming?
Thank you. There's another gentleman there with a microphone. Please ask your question.
Yes, my name is Kamal Hassan. I'm a commercial farmer from Kenya and also in Tanzania. I have many questions, but I think I will limit to general so that all panelists can answer. I see a lot of disconnect between farmers, whether they're small scale or large scale, and institutions that work with agriculture like FAO, Llano Lakes, which is one of the best models when it comes to farming cooperatives in the world, and also the forest. How can such organizations work, collaborate, and help with private sector players, the small scale farmers, the medium scale farmers, who are struggling to feed, because the government doesn't feed us here, it's the farmers who feed us. So if you are busy focusing all your energy and resources on a government which already failed its farmers, and you are not going out into the field and meeting with the farmers and supporting them, how do you expect a small farmer to find you here in Nairobi and ask you questions and ask for your help? I see a lot of organizations are concentrated in Nairobi, and they're all talking about climate change and farming, or helping farmers. Well, I don't see any farmers in Nairobi. The farmers are out there in the villages. You are all enjoying yourselves here, and you are theorizing, and we are struggling on the field. How can you help us? We are the ones who are really harvesting, planting on a daily basis. And we have no connection. We can't reach you. Some of you are located in, fortress where we cannot access. In here, in Girigiri and UN compounds. How can we interact? How can you deal directly with the private sector and help and guide? How can we work together?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lastly, there's a gentleman here with a microphone.
Yeah, ARED. I heard a lot about traditional farming, but my question is around urban farming, especially around technology like hydroponics, vertically integrated farming, that can really solve this deforestation problem. So what is your take on this type of technology, and why don't we see it growing in Africa? Because you see it growing in the West, at the UAE, but not in Africa. Thank you.
Okay. Finally, I see a lady with a microphone, finally. You'll be the last question we take in this round, and then we'll do another round. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Caroline Wangeshi. I am a member of GBFA, Green Blue Foundation Africa. Okay, I would like to know, as a government, how are we empowering our farmers? Because, for example, I tried farming, I failed, I left. Reason being, as a farmer, you put in a lot of resources, your money, your time, your energy, and then you get so little in return. So, but we can see when this food is brought into the market, it is sold at a very high price. But when it is there, it is the farmers, they do not get anything. So for me, I failed in that because I did not get anything in return. And another thing, okay, I can say this clearly. I was farming in Kinangop, and what I realized, we were using a lot of toxic chemicals. What is the government doing about curbing the use of these toxic chemicals? I realized the farmers, they know that they are toxic chemicals, and they are running away from those chemicals. There were farmers who were telling me, we have a piece of land whereby we only farm for our own use, and then the larger part, we farm for sale. So they know what they are using. What is the government doing about this?
Great, thank you. So I'd like you to hold on to, I hope you've noted the questions. We'll come back for you to answer, but right now I'd like to introduce someone, a very good friend of the Nation Media Group and a very good friend of Kenya, the Danish ambassador, who will tell us a little bit. I hope maybe you'll also tell us a little bit about what we can learn from Denmark, what they're doing in their agriculture. Please come. Ambassador Ole Tonke, ladies and gentlemen, the Danish ambassador to Kenya.
Thank you so much, Zainab, and great to see you again. We were together on Wednesday for really interesting discussions, and I really want to thank NTV for organizing this Kusi Festival and having that in-depth discussion on these really important issues. Also making sure that the awareness around climate change is being put out there in Kenya. I wanted actually to talk about the question from one of the farmers that said that we are disconnected from this global or academic discussion that is happening here in Gigiri. And I think that's actually a really important point. Going back to the last elections we had in Denmark in 2019, that happened to be the first election in the history of Denmark where climate change was on the top of the voters' agenda. That was the #1 issue for the Danish voters at that time. That came out of a long period of time where the children, they went on the Fridays for Futures strike, which really impacted the political agenda in Denmark. So the new government came in on a very strong mandate and with a very strong sense that they needed to really up their game on climate change. And they agreed to have a new and much more ambitious target of 70% of reduction in CO2 emissions. And they were very open and said, we do not know, and we don't have the technology as of now to get there, but we want to set the ambitions as high as possible. And again, to then delve into how to go about that challenge, the government set down or organized 15 partnerships in all the different sectors that are touched by climate change and where there are CO2 emissions, etc. And it was everything from transport to agriculture, as we have just discussed, to energy. Even the banking and financial sector was part of a partnership that they were given the mandate to come up with solutions. How can Denmark reach this ambitious target of 70%? And that led to a very, very interesting discussion, and exactly as the question, connecting the farmers of Denmark to the political ambitions and to the people sitting in Copenhagen and having these more academic discussions. And each of these partnerships were headed by one of the leaders in the sector. So the one in agriculture was headed by the leader of the Danish agricultural organizations. So they were in there, and they were being tasked of coming up with a number of recommendations on how exactly can their sector contribute to these 70% and become a more climate-friendly sector as such. And that led to 15 partnerships with each of them, a lot of recommendations that then came into the government machinery and were turned into new regulations, new subsidies or taxes if that was needed, etc., etc. But putting the incentives and making sure that you had a very, very strong collaboration with the private sector, with the farmers of Denmark, with the electricity providers, of how actually to move this agenda in Denmark. And I believe Kenya has come really, really far on this agenda, especially if you compare to many of your neighbors in Africa. And there are already talks, and you have a very strong private sector that are interested in this. You have a very strong financial sector who want this to happen. But getting that very, very close dialogue and conversation, I believe, is one of the keys to really move this another step. I know both KEPSA and KAM, they are trying to organize partnerships, one around waste management, circular economy, again, connecting the ones who are collecting the garbage to the one who potentially can reuse some of the recycled plastics, etc., etc., and to have that conversation. So for me, that would be really a great outcome if there could be more of that in Kenya. And why not have a partnership on agriculture where the farmers came together with the political leaders and the investors, because all hands needs to be on deck on this, and everybody needs to work together on this. And what we've seen, I believe, in Kenya, because we are, as the Danish embassy, what we term a frontline mission. So we are also supposed to walk the talk and be a climate-friendly representation here. So we have bought an electric vehicle, for instance, and it was a year ago. At that time, we actually couldn't buy a brand new electric vehicle in Nairobi. So we had to source it from Uganda and import it together with an e-bike, by the way. And it runs perfectly, and it can run 300 kilometers without recharge, and it runs on the electricity of Kenya, which is 90% renewable. So for me, I was like, why is there not more focus on that in a country like Kenya? You import, the biggest import bill of Kenya is petrol. You wouldn't have to if you quickly transformed into e-mobility, for instance. Another thing we did was we had to lay new tiles on the grounds, and we found this Kenyan company called Jenge that does tiles made of recycled plastics. They were lighter, they were even cheaper than the normal standard tiles. So we bought them, and they work perfectly on the grounds. My point is that there are actually a lot of innovative solutions already happening, both in Kenya and in the region. The question is how to scale that up and how to connect those dots to make sure that comes out and really changes how things are done here in Kenya. So I'll leave it at that, but really thank you a lot for your attention and wish you great discussions further on through the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Balozi. Thank you. Now, I'm told there's one more person with a microphone. I'm sorry I skipped you. Where are you? Yes, please say your name and who you're addressing your question to.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Derek Kabasa. I have one question, and maybe I'll suggest the panelists to give a comment on the other one. First, I think when you talk about food security, we cannot miss the point of food wastages. So how are we working towards reducing food wastage as we tackle food security? I think putting things into context, I saw a feature in a particular media house whereby farmers were decrying in Nyeri. They have a lot of produce that they have maybe gotten from the season, but also we are seeing some people dying due to hunger. So how do we close that gap? Then also, secondly, it's a comment. I think Madam Martha quite shared a bit light on that. We have the GMOs now. So I'll wish, I know it's quite a hot topic, but I'll wish the panelists maybe to give a comment on that. When you're talking about technology, and I believe that's biotechnology in agriculture, so how do we handle that, even going on forward as a country and also as a continent? Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take those questions first as you think about what you'd like. If there's anyone who still has a question and hasn't asked, we'll come back to you for the second round. So Carla, I'd like to start with you. Some of the questions were addressed to you.
Thank you, Zainab. Actually, some of the questions, when we started, we really somehow, of course, talked about it. And how do we really ensure that we are not disconnected with the farmers? And we mentioned that we really work so closely with the farmers. As FAO, of course, our main office is in Nairobi, but we have around 14 offices at the county level. And this really shows that we really want to be close to the farmers. Actually, the farmers are really at the heart of the FAO agenda. If we talk about agriculture, if we talk about ensuring food security and nutrition, agriculture is really done by the farmers. So our work is with the farmers, with them and to them. And what we are really saying, that of course, we have to train them. They have also, of course, this knowledge that we really want to harness to make sure that it informs policies, it informs decision, it informs strategies that can also, again, help them. Of course, the issue of extension, we know that, of course, extension is aging, is one of the areas where we are really working very closely with the government to see how can we really revitalize, because this is so important, to adopt those technologies that are really needed for the transformation. So I really want to assure you that farmers are at the heart of the FAO agenda and the FAO mandate, and is with them that we work. They produce, the food that we eat, and we really have to care. Actually, at the beginning, you mentioned that we have to thank them. And the drought, of course, we're talking about climate change. This is the topic also of the conversation, that climate change is really impacting in agriculture. We see drought, we see floods. We just came out, I don't know even if we came out from COVID-19. And this was really huge. And how do we really ensure that we adapt, that we really mitigate? And again, we have to build resilience. And this is really huge. It means that we really have to inform our early earning and the early action system so that, of course, we can be able, of course, to take, of course, actions in advance, anticipatory action. So those are issues that we are really working on them. Of course, the challenges are huge. The magnitude is really immense. But we have to come together, and then again, of course, recognizing what the ambassador was saying, that this is not a conversation that should really come isolated. This is a holistic one that is needed. This is a multi-sector one that is needed. I'm happy also to hear about private sector. The role of private sector in this conversation is really key. We just, of course, together with the FAO, adopted the strategy on climate change with private sector because they have an important role to play also in that. Actually, agriculture, we want to, on all the policies and all the strategies that we are really have been embarking on, and we want them to make sense and really to contribute to that transformation. I really wanted to say that the private sector has a big role to play because even farmers are really private sector. Of course, you know, you have the subsistence one, but where they always want to produce a little bit more so that they can sell, they can take their kids to school, they can improve their lives. So I want to say that, of course, we are here to come together, and we see that, of course, the challenges are huge, but we have best practices that we want to make sure that we really upscale them, we expand them, so that they can really be transformative. So maybe I will just stop here, and then I can chip in also if there is anything else to add. Yes. Thank you.
Martha, there was a lady there who talked about how she's tried farming and failed. And personally, I actually relate with you because I tried too and failed. There was a time I thought I could be a wheat farmer. And unfortunately, I was a telephone farmer, so it didn't go well for me, so I had to abandon it. But she raises this issue of farmers failing, trying something and failing and giving up along the way. But it also brings in the aspect of, you know, people want to succeed very quickly. You want to get returns very quickly. How do farmers work around that?
And she also talked about toxic chemicals.
Yes.
That's the one that actually caught my attention. Well, I think that farming is not a hobby, it's a business. So what we lack really is mentorship. I think if she had the right mentorship, perhaps she wouldn't have quit. But let me go quickly to the one on toxic chemicals. These are not meant to be toxic chemicals. The pesticides, the herbicides are products with a lot of research has gone into them. They are to help us manage pests, diseases, and those risks that are actually making our agriculture less productive. With climate change, we've seen that there's an increase, an escalation of transboundary pests and diseases, and which are even more resilient to the traditional way of managing them. So the research, the science behind these chemicals always brings new products that are safer to use and products that are effective. Now, the challenge and the real problem, here's where the real problem is. You need very effective regulatory frameworks. For every chemical, for every active ingredient, we need to have domestic regulatory limits to know that if it's used on a product, the residue limits must be not higher than this level. And monitoring programs to ensure that as we apply, we are not exceeding those limits. So I see that most of the countries where we have worked, I've worked in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, there are no monitoring programs. And the farmers are not getting the advice they need in terms of applying them safely to ensure that the product has safe residue limits that are not going to harm consumers or the environment. So I think that's where the problem is. The problem is not in the product is okay, it is safe, it's been tested, it's effective, but it's how you regulate, monitor, and apply it in the field. Mentoring definitely would help.
Thank you. Dr. Tadesse, there was a question about urban farming. How do you incorporate urban farming in the transformation of food systems?
Yes, thank you very much. There were many questions, interesting questions. Of course, you know, farmers have legal right to feed his family. We cannot just complain what farmers are doing to the forest, but what we should do is we should provide alternative in a way that we improve their productivity so that they can easily feed their family. So one of which, for example, is urban farming, where it cannot be I think I'm loud enough. So it cannot be like for feeding the whole nation, but at least at family level, there are ways of doing urban farming, like for example, dairy farms, vegetables and so forth. But there was one very interesting question raised by, like, why are we not using hydroponics? And hydroponics, for the sake of transforming agriculture, is somehow difficult for a country, for a continent which couldn't extensively farm and cultivate and produce enough food for the continent. It's very difficult to think of hydroponics to transform the agriculture. There was also another interesting question, like as my colleagues have said, how many percent of, for example, Denmark, I really thank the ambassador for the experience, but what percentage of Danish people are farmers? In the look, how much percentage is Africa and failing to feed the continent? And then what percentage of that European country is forest? So we have to think of the way we are doing business in agriculture. Otherwise, we cannot complain the whole thing. For example, in chemicals, we have to strictly follow all the research that are for the benefit of farmers are done with huge care and regulation. So we don't have to, feed to that level, but proper regulation of the way of applications and the use of those chemicals has to be in place. For example, someone raised about GMOs. GMOs are maybe only food drugs, medicine or pharmaceuticals are the only ones better regulated than GMOs. This
we seem to have lost that connection with Dr. Tadesse. We seem to have lost that connection. But yes, there was a question about GMOs and how controversial they are. Is that something you'd like to comment on, Martha?
Really, it's a technology like any other.
Yes.
It has a lot of benefits. As we move into the future, the challenge of feeding for instance, here, the African population that's growing at that rate, I think we will need technology. It's one of the options we have. And any country has